Who are you really? Are you the body you see in the mirror, the stream of thoughts moving through your mind, the memories you hold, the roles you play, the name others call you by? If all of these changed tomorrow, would you still be you? Buddhism teaches that what we call the self is not a fixed, solid entity, but a constantly shifting process, a collection of conditions coming together moment by moment. Yet most of us live as if there is a permanent me, something unchanging to protect, prove, and perfect. And this illusion, subtle but powerful, is the root of so much quiet suffering. Today, we'll explore why the self you believe in may not be as real as it seems, and how loosening your grip on that self can open the door to a freedom deeper than you've ever known. Let's begin. 1. The constructed self, a story. Woven from moments, close your eyes for a moment. Notice a single thought. Perhaps it says, I am listening. Another thought might arise. I am curious. I am learning. Each of these feels personal, as if there is a solid I behind the words. But look closer. Can you find the one who thinks? Or is there just thought arising and passing, like clouds in a vast sky? Buddhism calls this investigation anatta, the teaching of not-self. The Buddha taught that what we take to be me is just 5 changing processes, known as the 5 aggregates: form, rupa, the body; sensations, physical elements; feeling, vedana, the pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral tones that arise with each experience; perception, sana, how we recognize and label the world; mental formations, sankhara, thoughts, emotions, habits, intentions; consciousness, vijnana, the bare knowing of experience. None of these aggregates, by themselves or together, can be found to be a solid self. They are like a river, always flowing, never fixed. And yet, the mind stitches them together into a continuous story. This is me. This is who I've always been. This is who I must protect. This story becomes our anchor, but also our prison. 2. How clinging to self breeds suffering. Why does this illusion matter? Why not simply enjoy our sense of identity, even if it's not ultimately true? Because when we believe in a fixed me, we inevitably begin to cling to the body, fearing its aging, illness, and death; to our beliefs and opinions, feeling threatened when others disagree; to our roles and titles, terrified of failure or loss; to our past and future, weaving endless stories to preserve our image. This clinging breeds subtle anxiety, fear, and a restless drive to control what cannot be controlled. The Buddha compared it to holding a burning torch against the wind. The harder we grip, the more we suffer. In truth, everything we identify as me is impermanent. The body changes, thoughts arise and dissolve, emotions shift like weather. The people who affirm our identity will someday leave, or we will. When we cling to something so unstable, suffering is inevitable. 3. Seeing through the illusion, a practice of direct observation. So how do we loosen our grip on this elusive sense of self without falling into confusion or despair? How can we explore the profound Buddhist teaching of anatta, no self, not just as a philosophical idea, but as a direct, lived experience that transforms how we see ourselves and the world? The answer lies in the practice of direct observation, a fundamental method in Buddhist meditation that invites us to step back and simply witness our experience as it unfolds. This practice helps us recognize the transient and impersonal nature of what we usually identify as I or me. Begin by sitting quietly in meditation. Close your eyes gently and bring your attention to your body. Notice the natural rhythm of your breath, the gentle rising and falling, the coolness as you inhale, the warmth as you exhale. Don't try to control the breath, just observe it. As you observe, thoughts will arise. Perhaps you notice a thought like, "This is boring," or "Am I doing this right?" Don't judge or push them away. Instead, gently observe these thoughts as well. See them as mental events passing through your awareness. Now, ask yourself some simple but powerful questions. Where is the thinker? Where is the owner of the breath? Can you find a fixed, unchanging self behind these passing experiences? Chances are you won't find a solid entity behind your thoughts or sensations. Instead, what you discover is awareness itself, a vast open space in which sensations, emotions, and thoughts arise and fade away. There is knowing, but no fixed knower. This insight is at the heart of Buddhist wisdom. It reveals that the self we cling to is not a permanent, isolated identity, but a fluid, dynamic process. We are not separate islands, but part of a continuous flow of experience. Zen master Huang Po beautifully expressed this truth. When no distinction exists between mind and object, that is the true state of reality. What this means is that the boundary between me and the world dissolves in deep awareness. There is simply life unfolding moment by moment without a separate self controlling or owning it. This practice of direct observation is not a denial of existence. It doesn't say you don't exist at all. Instead, it shifts your perspective from being a separate someone to becoming the spacious awareness in which everything appears and disappears. You begin to experience yourself not as a fixed thing, but as the open field of consciousness itself. As you cultivate this awareness, your attachment to a rigid identity naturally softens. You start to see through the illusion of a solid self and recognize the freedom that comes from living with an open heart and mind. This practice of direct observation is a powerful tool for anyone seeking to awaken from the illusion of self. It helps dissolve the barriers that separate us, revealing a profound unity with all life. By seeing clearly, without the filter of ego, we step into a deeper reality, one where peace, compassion, and clarity naturally arise. 4. The fear of losing me. For many people, the concept of no self or anatta in Buddhist teachings feels deeply unsettling, even frightening. We instinctively ask, if there is no self, what happens to my memories, my relationships, my dreams, and everything that makes me who I am? Will it all simply vanish? This fear often stops people from exploring the profound freedom that comes with understanding the true nature of the self. Buddhism does not teach annihilation or the destruction of our being. Rather, it teaches a path to freedom. Freedom from the suffering caused by clinging to a fixed, fragile identity. This freedom is not about losing ourselves, but about letting go of the false notion that there is a permanent, unchanging me to protect. Imagine holding a handful of water. The harder you squeeze, the more it slips away between your fingers. But if you cup your hands loosely, the water stays gently resting there without effort. This simple image perfectly illustrates what it means to let go of the self. When we try to cling tightly to our identity, to the stories we tell about ourselves, we create tension and anxiety. But when we relax our grip, life flows more naturally and peacefully. Letting go of the egoic self doesn't mean giving up on life. Relationships continue, creativity flows, goals remain meaningful. But now these aspects of life are experienced without the constant strain of defending or proving who we are. We no longer feel the need to protect a fragile sense of self that is always at risk of being threatened. In fact, loosening this grip often makes life more vivid and alive. When we stop filtering every moment through the lens of how does this affect me, or what does this say about who I am, we begin to see the world more clearly. The colors become sharper, the sounds richer, and our compassion deepens. Without the ego's interference, we connect more authentically with others, and the present moment. The Thai forest master Ajahn Chah beautifully captured this truth when he said, "You see, in truth, there is no you who suffers, there is only suffering." When you understand this deeply, suffering begins to end. This insight reveals that suffering is not something inflicted on a fixed self, but a shared experience arising from the conditions of life itself. By releasing the illusion of a permanent self, we open the door to profound healing and peace. Understanding the fear of losing the me is an essential step on the spiritual path. It allows us to face our resistance and move toward a deeper truth. That true freedom lies not in holding on, but in letting go. The role of impermanence, anicca. The teaching of anatta, the doctrine of no self, is inseparable from another essential Buddhist truth, anicca, or impermanence. These two are deeply intertwined. To truly understand one is to see the other more clearly. Take a single breath as a simple, everyday example. It arises naturally, lingers for a brief moment, and then quietly fades away. This cycle repeats without effort, endlessly. The same is true for every thought, every sensation, every emotion, and every role or identity we assume. Nothing remains fixed or permanent. Everything is in constant flux. Yet, despite this obvious truth, we habitually cling to a sense of self as if it were something solid and unchanging. We hold on to the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, to our past experiences, to our likes and dislikes, and even to our future hopes. We mistake these passing elements for a permanent I, but they are all transient phenomena. When we cling to a self, we are essentially grasping onto something that by its very nature will change and dissolve. This grasping is the root of suffering because it sets us up to experience loss, disappointment, and fear. The moment what we identify with shifts or disappears, suffering follows. But when we truly see impermanence, something fundamental shifts in us. We no longer expect things or ourselves to stay the same. We stop trying to hold life still or control its flow. Instead, we begin to embrace change as an inherent part of existence. This acceptance opens the door to a profound peace, a gentle surrender to the flow of all things rather than a battle against them. The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent." When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. When we truly take this to heart, we realize that clinging to permanence is like trying to hold water in our hands. It always slips away. Life itself is movement, change, a continuous becoming from one moment to the next. The moment we release our grip on permanence, life feels lighter. What once seemed threatening, impermanence, becomes the very source of our freedom. 6. The fruits of letting go. So, what happens when we loosen our grip on the self, when we stop trying to hold on to a fixed identity, a solid I? In that open space, something beautiful arises. Transformation. 1. Compassion deepens. The first fruit of letting go is compassion. When we see that our own identity is not fixed but fluid, ever-changing with thoughts, emotions, and sensations passing through us like clouds, we soften. We no longer cling to every thought as me or mine, and this insight naturally extends outward. We begin to see others in the same way. Their anger, their fear, their joy, their confusion, none of it is permanent. It is simply a moment in the larger flow of life. This changes the way we relate to people. Instead of labeling someone as angry or difficult, we recognize them as a human being, temporarily caught in suffering or in joy. That recognition opens the heart, judgment fades, compassion deepens. Buddhist teachings emphasize metta, loving kindness, and karuna, compassion. These are not abstract ideals to be forced. They arise naturally when we see the truth of impermanence and interconnectedness. When we realize that everyone carries the weight of change and loss, our hearts soften. Instead of reacting with criticism or anger, we respond with kindness, patience, and forgiveness. Compassion becomes the natural response to the shared condition of impermanence. 2. Fear softens. Another profound fruit of letting go is the softening of fear, especially the fear of death, loss, and change. Much of our fear comes from the belief that there is a fixed self that must be protected at all costs. We live as though there were a solid I that could be harmed, abandoned, or destroyed. But when we begin to see the self not as something permanent, but as a process, a flow of conditions arising and passing away, the fear begins to loosen its hold. The Buddha taught that clinging to the illusion of a permanent self is the root of anxiety and suffering. When we release that grip, impermanence no longer appears as a threat. Instead, it reveals itself as the very fabric of life, natural, inevitable, even liberating. This is not indifference, nor is it resignation. It is freedom. Freedom from the paralyzing fear that comes from trying to hold on to what cannot be held. 3. Presence becomes effortless. When we stop constantly maintaining a story about ourselves, who we are, what we must do, and how we should appear, presence arises naturally. There is a quiet peace in simply being here, breathing, listening, and living without the heavy burden of defending a fixed identity. In Buddhist practice, this is often called mindfulness or bare attention, resting fully in the present moment without judgment or distraction. When the noise of self-centered thoughts fades, life reveals itself more directly and vividly. Each moment becomes fresh, alive, and unfiltered by the lens of I and mine for. Freedom arises. The final fruit of letting go is freedom. The Buddha called this freedom nibbana or nirvana, the extinguishing of clinging, craving, and the suffering they create. Nibbana is not a distant or unreachable state. It is here. In every moment we release the grip of I, me, and mine. This freedom is like the open sky, vast, clear, and unbound. When the clouds of clinging and identity dissolve, what remains is the stillness, clarity, and peace of our true nature. The Diamond Sutra, one of the most treasured Mahayana texts, expresses this truth with timeless beauty. Thus shall you think of all this fleeting world: a star at dawn, a bubble in a stream, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, a flickering lamp, a phantom, and a dream. This imagery reminds us to see the world and ourselves not as fixed or permanent, but as luminous and passing. When we recognize this dreamlike quality of the self, our grasping softens on its own. We stop clinging so tightly to identities, achievements, or fears. In that gentle release, peace begins to bloom. We start to live not from scarcity and defense, but from openness and abundance. This is the heart of the spiritual path, the freedom to awaken to life as it truly is, transient, interconnected, and vibrantly alive. You are not who you think you are, not because you are nothing, but because you are not a thing at all. You are a flow, a space, an openness in which all experience unfolds. When you release the story of me, you do not vanish. You awaken. We begin to taste a freedom beyond clinging, beyond fear, beyond the endless search to prove ourselves. So sit quietly, breathe, and watch the river of your experience. Notice how life flows here, radiant, open, and free, even without a fixed self trying to hold it. Allow yourself to rest in that space. If this reflection resonated with you, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who may also be seeking peace on their path. Thank you for being here.